Reclaiming Chicago's Indigenous Legacy, the Autochthonous American History behind DuSable, Chicago, and the Mound Builders. Abstract. Chicago's history is rooted in the legacy of Autochthonous Indigenous Americans, the original copper-colored inhabitants of Turtle Island, North America. As recorded in Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary, the term American originally referred to these melanated peoples who thrived in the Americas long before European arrival. However, colonial systems, including Spanish conquistadors, British and French colonial administrators, erased their indigenous status by misclassifying them as Negroes and later African Americans. This article uncovers Chicago's true indigenous origins, focusing on Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable's autochthonous lineage, the original name Chicago, and the ancient mound builders of the Midwest. It also examines how Congressional Resolution 331 affirms that the governance principles of autochthonous Americans shaped the U.S. Constitution, reinforcing the legal obligation to protect their history and identity. Defining autochthonous indigenous Americans, the true meaning of American, historical definition of American. The original definition of American was documented in Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary as a native of America, originally applied to the Aboriginals or copper-colored races found here by Europeans, but now applied to the descendants of Europeans born in America. live.org/details/American Dictionary 0 Websrich, page 14/mode/2up. This definition confirms that the first Americans were melanated indigenous peoples, not Europeans. Spanish conquistadors, British, and French colonial forces later reclassified these indigenous peoples as Negroes, or Africans, to justify land dispossession, forced labor, and taxation under colonial laws. Resource loc.gov/vcb.252965. Congressional Recognition of Indigenous American Governance. In House Congressional Resolution 331, 1988, the U.S. government acknowledged that the Great Law of Peace of the Iroquois Confederacy directly influenced the U.S. Constitution. /www.congress.gov Congress/Bill/110th Congress/House Concurrent Resolution/3D1 text. This affirms that autochthonous indigenous Americans not only pre-existed the United States but contributed to its foundation, reinforcing the legal argument that the government is obligated to preserve and protect their identity, land, and governance structures. The real origins of Chicago and its indigenous name. Before European colonization, the region now known as Chicago was called Chicaquois in the Miami, Illinois language, meaning wild onion or garlic. For chicagohistory.org/the roots of Chicago/who named Chicago, the Miami, Potawatomi, and Illinois Confederation tribes originally referred to the land as Chicaquois, meaning wild onion. The French explorers mispronounced it as Shekagu, adapting the name to their own language. Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable, a melanated autochthonous indigenous man, established Chicago's first permanent settlement. Despite DuSable's foundational role, his true heritage as an autochthonous indigenous American has been erased in favor of a foreigner narrative. 5. DuPageHistory.org/Jean-Baptiste-Point DuSable/ The Mound Builders, Chicago's indigenous trade and governance, ancient civilizations in the Midwest. Chicago was once part of a vast Mississippian trade empire, led by mound builders who constructed massive earthen pyramids, facilitated continental trade, and governed complex societies. Key contributions of indigenous Americans to Chicago's development. 1. Mound builders, Mississippians, constructed trade centers and pyramids that rivaled those in Egypt. Smithsonianmag.com/histories What Happened to Cahokia 1148444388. 2. The Three Fires Confederacy, Ottawa, Ojibwe, controlled the region's governance and commerce long before European arrival. Potawatomi.org/2020-0609/brief history of the Potawatomi/ 3. Trade networks. Chicago's waterways were key to indigenous copper, furs, and agricultural trade routes spanning from Canada to Mexico. Chicago's indigenous connection to the U.S. Constitution. As recognized in Congressional Resolution 331, indigenous governance principles shaped American law. congress.gov/bills/100th Congress/House-concurrent resolution/3D1 text. This directly contradicts the false notion that autochthonous Americans had no political or legal structures. The legal and historical misclassification of autochthonous Americans from indigenous to Negro colonial reclassifications, Spanish conquistadors and British administrators documented melanated indigenous peoples as Negro in early colonial records. /www.archives.gov/research/census Native Americans /1880-1930.html. The U.S. Census from 1790 to 1930 reclassified many indigenous Americans as Negro or mulatto, stripping them of their legal identity. .loc.gov/resource LHB/LHBCB.5/ Today, the term African American is a registered trademark, raising legal concerns over its forced application to indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. USPTO.gov. Share conclusion: reclaiming indigenous autochthonous leadership in Chicago's cultural institutions. As the DuSable Black History Museum and Education Center continues its mission, it must preserve and uplift the true history of autochthonous indigenous Americans. This includes 1. Restoring John Baptiste Point DuSable's true indigenous legacy, recognizing him as an autochthonous American, not just an immigrant. 2. Correcting the historical misclassification of autochthonous Americans, acknowledging their role in shaping Chicago's trade, law, and governance. 3. Advocating for legal recognition of indigenous identity, reinforcing that African American should not be applied to autochthonous peoples without consent. By addressing these truths, institutions like DuSable Museum can play a pivotal role in restoring historical integrity, legal recognition, and cultural sovereignty for the original Americans. Have references: Noah Webster, American Dictionary of the English Language, 1828 edition. 2. Library of Congress, Early Colonial Records on Native American Enslavement, National Archives. 3. U.S. House Congressional Resolution 3331, Recognition of the Iroquois Confederacy's Influence on the U.S. Constitution. 4. Chicago Historical Society, The Indigenous Origins of the Name Chicago. 5. DuPage History Museum, John Baptiste Point DuSable and Chicago's Indigenous Foundations. 6. Smithsonian Institution, Cahokia and the Mississippian Civilization, A Lost American Empire. 7. Citizen Potawatomi Nation, A Brief History of the Potawatomi Nation. 8. National Archives, U.S. Census Racial Reclassification of Indigenous Americans, 1880 to 1930. 9. U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, Trademark Registration of African American. Published by Freddie A. Williams, Elbe Ahau, Chief Environmental and Sustainability Shaman Officer, Autochthonous Level Up Magazine. Zero image 1, turn 0 image 5. To enhance the scholarly depth of our article, we've incorporated historical images and documents that substantiate the discussed facts. Below are selected visuals accompanied by their descriptions and sources. 1. Definition of American in Webster's 1828 Dictionary. Webster's 1828 Dictionary, definition of American, /www.flickr.com/photos/Sentasha/1412416 description. This image displays the definition of American from Noah Webster's 1828 Dictionary, describing natives of America as copper-colored races. Source /w.com/fund. 2. Congressional Resolution 331. Congressional Resolution 330/legaltimelines.org/accessible-timeline/federalism. Description: an excerpt from House Concurrent Resolution 331, acknowledging the influence of the Iroquois Confederacy on the U.S. Constitution. Source: legal timeline /3 challenges with misclassification of American Indian Alaska Native race. Misclassification of Indigenous Americans /www.resgate.net/publication/3646375 scores. Challenges with misclassification of American Indian Alaska Native race and Hispanic ethnicity on death records in North Carolina occupational fatalities surveillance. Description: A scholarly article discussing the misclassification issues faced by Americans in official records. Source / www.wgate.net/publications 3646377F90 challenges with misclassification of American Indian, Alaska Native race, and Hispanic ethnicity on death records in North Carolina occupational fatalities surveillance. Mississippian Builders Artifacts. Mrs./ar.inspiredpencil.com/pic/2023/Mississippian Mound Builders-artifacts. Description: artifacts from the Mississippian Mound Builders illustrating the advanced indigenous civilizations in the Midwest. Source /r.pencil.com/pictures-mound-builders-artifacts. 5. Addressing racial misclassification www.uihide.org/resources/addressing racial misclassification / a resource highlighting efforts to correct racial misclassification of indigenous populations in data collection. Source Urban Indian Health Institute www.uihi.org/resources addressing racial misclassification / These images and documents provide visual evidence supporting the historical narratives and legal recognitions discussed in the article, enriching our understanding of Chicago's indigenous roots and the misclassification challenges faced by Autochthonous Americans.